In 2019, Anne Helen Peterson's viral BuzzFeed article, How Millennials Became the Burnout Generation, highlighted the growing issue of burnout among millennials. The COVID-19 pandemic has since amplified burnout across all generations, exposing systemic issues in the economy and the workplace. Today, we're going to explore what's causing this rise in burnout across different generations and discuss strategies for navigating mental health in a multi-generational work environment. Hi, everybody. My name is Rochelle.
And I'm Jeff.
And this is Burnout Banter. Before we jump into today's episode, please remember to subscribe to the podcast on Spotify, Amazon, Apple Podcasts, YouTube, or wherever you listen so that you can stay up to date with the latest banter. So before we jump in, Jeff, what generation are you?
I'm X.
You're X? Oh, you're the forgotten generation. Oh no.
Yeah.
I
Right on
am
that age. I was at the very tail end of it, 1970.
okay.
So, and I've seen some bands of time that include those last couple of years of the 70s, and I've also seen it cut off at the 80s.
Yeah, the generations seem kind of fluid to me. So I would accept you as an elder millennial if you so wanted to join us. But since
No, I like being X.
we're the lazy, entitled burnout generation, I don't know if you want to come to our camp. We seem to be universally hated.
Which is silly, right? I think that happens with every generation, right? The older generations look down on the younger generations for whatever reason because they're different.
Oh, absolutely. I
Yeah.
love seeing like historical newspaper clippings of like some grumpy old man from the 1700s like complaining about the kids of like today. And it's just been going on for hundreds of years.
Yeah.
But burnout has
You're a,
perhaps
you're a millennial, right?
not.
You're
What?
a millennial, correct?
I am a millennial. I'm
Yeah.
like a mid-millennial. There's no question on where I belong in the generations. I sometimes don't get all of the elder millennial references, but I get about 99% of them. So,
And very few of the Generation X references. I found out.
yes, yes. Every time we talk, I have no idea what Jeff is talking about. I will watch the Babysitter's Club one day.
Adventures in Babysitting, not the
I'm
baby.
sorry.
It's
Oh,
okay.
see, I can't even get them right.
You knew it had babysitting in it.
Yeah, I would have Googled it. I would have gotten there eventually. I'm tech savvy. It's a hallmark of my generation and yours, supposedly. So, but burnout is kind of new. And while millennials kind of get the tag as the burnout generation and Gen Z kind of gets looped into that, everyone statistically across the board, millennials, Gen Z, Gen X, and boomers have been surveyed and indicate that they have experienced an increase in burnout post-pandemic.
I was just going to
So
say, do you even think it's new, or it's just been recently defined?
I think it's recently defined. I strongly encourage anybody to go find that Anne Helen Peterson article, and we can link it in the show notes on how millennials became the burnout generation. Um, because it wasn't so much that like there's a lot of factors that go into it, but I think in becoming that generation, we have also kind of defined and made it more widely acknowledged that burnout is a thing. And so I think now it's rippling out and we're starting to see and apply it to other generations as well. And like, oh, it makes sense that, this Gen Xer or this boomer or whatever is struggling with burnout just in a different way. And that's really what I wanted to talk about today is because it manifests differently because it comes from different things for each of us, but it's all burnout at the end of the day. I think it's something we're just maybe not familiar with because our burnout, like I think probably Gen X and millennials have a similar burnout stresses, and so they look similar to us. But like maybe looking at our parents' generations or older generations, their burnout looks very different to
Yeah,
us.
what's interesting about Gen X is I think a lot of why they do what they do, it could be tied back to burnout issues in their parents, even though it was never talked about or never acknowledged, or they wouldn't have called it burnout, right? But high divorce rates, all those things that Gen X struggle with having their parents experience in the workplace is kind of pretty formative for why we are the way we are.
Right. I wish someone would write like the same article that Anne Helen Peterson wrote for millennials, detailing exactly why we are the burnout generation and like how our parents shaped us to be that way and how like the world and the economy and like decisions that were being made kind of drove us into that. Wish someone would do that for every generation that's in the workplace right now, because it would be really helpful, I think, to understand that.
Maybe that's some homework for you and me, huh?
Ah,
Maybe we can be
maybe.
those people.
Let's do it. It was really hard, honestly, researching this article. It was very difficult to find boomer burnout for sure was the hardest one. Gen X was a little bit more difficult as well. And silent generation just didn't exist at all, even though there are still a few silent generation people in the workforce. So, yeah, definitely worth looking into. But I thought it'd be interesting to maybe go generation by generation because there's so little information, and kind of talk through like what do we think uh inspires their burnout, or like how they respond to it. And then kind of look at some of the information that they could find on what is contributing to their burnout, and kind of help people understand what's going on with their coworkers.
That sounds good. Where do you want to start?
Well, I kind of figure we start with the low-hanging fruit, which is the burnout generation,
Okay.
the millennials. Again, this entire article sums it up so beautifully, and Anne Helen Peterson's book also expands on the culmination of factors that have contributed to the burnout generation, quote unquote, air quotes.
So what makes them the
Um,
burnout generation?
so it's really hard to sum up, but basically, uh, my generation was raised in this way that we were being prepared for the workforce from like the beginning. So we had this like really intense self-optimization, I guess is the way to put it, from like a young age. Like we were put in a lot of after school clubs and uh told like pretty much everything we did at a certain point was to prepare ourselves for work. And I feel like that's even worse for Gen Z. I want to talk about that because like some of the elder millennials, myself included, even though I'm in the middle, we still got like a childhood, right? Like we got to go play. You know, the rule was like be home before the lights go out or whatever, stuff like that. But as you got older, like by the time I got into high school, it was very much like a lot of my friends were building their resumes for college, but it wasn't even for college, it was for the job they wanted after college, which was, looking back, that's wild.
It's
Wow, people
so
were
much
like,
worse now because I have
I
two kids in high school, and it's insane the amount of stress that they're under to perform and do all like community service, AP classes. Like my son's taking an AP class as a freshman. That was unheard of when we were in school. Like you couldn't even do it until you were a senior. So
I was gonna say you couldn't do it until you were a sophomore when I was in school. They only had two AP classes available to sophomores. Freshmen were not allowed. That's crazy. And I'm glad you mentioned that because I didn't look at Gen Alpha. But I kind of wanted to pick your brain on like when we talk about Gen Z, is like using your experience with your kiddos and Gen Alpha and like kind of like how that's shifting. Um, but yeah, there was just this wild we there's the idea of the big lie, right? Where we were told, you know, if you work hard, you get a good job.
yeah, go to college,
And
job.
you go to college, yeah, you follow all the steps, you get rewarded. And our school was largely set up that way, right? Like you do everything you're supposed to do in school, you get rewarded. You go out into the world, and now millennials are being like, we've dealt with two recessions and the pandemic and wars, and like we've had a rough time, as have all the other generations because they're living through it as well. But we're starting to see that like psychological toll of realizing that that's not true. Like we are working really hard because that's what we were told. Like it worked for our parents. They worked really hard. They were rewarded with great economy, great jobs, white picket fence and all that. But that the world isn't set up to do that for us. And that's extremely difficult to swallow. And that's contributing to our burnout because all we know, all we've been trained to do for our entire lives
It's
is
hard.
work. Whether even if it's in like we're the hustle generation, like the turn your passion into a paycheck, right? So even if you're like doing something for fun, in the back of our minds, we're always trying to monetize it. Millennials are like, okay, I do this fun like paint by numbers art thing, and people have told me it's cool, I'm gonna go sell it.
Yeah.
Like we don't just create just to create. And so, but like realizing that maybe that's not gonna work is really difficult. And then we've got this kind of like generational stigma around we're the lazy entitled generation, and that bleeds into Gen Z as well. And so while we are much more open with our burnout, and I think kind of paving the way for that next generations to acknowledge that it's a thing and it's okay, and taking time for yourself is okay as well. I think when we look up generations like Gen X and boomers, we don't want to talk about it because we don't want to appear like needy to them. Like, I need to take a step back for my mental health. You say that to certain elder coworkers and they might respond in a certain way. So,
Yeah, I think Gen X gets that more than maybe the boomer generation does, because I think we saw the impact of just working all the time play out in our parents' lives, and have health issues and all the stuff that came along with that. So I think we might be more understanding than you think. Um,
good to know.
we're trying, we've been trying to figure out this work-life balance thing. I think that kind of started with us. And what does that look like, right? Because it didn't exist before. And how do you have two working parents and or two working adults in a family, right? And have some sort of semblance of balance when people are working all the time.
Right? Yeah, like there's a bunch of economic craziness that happened for your generation as well entering the workforce and trying to balance that out. I just, I feel like it was equally as difficult, and maybe we don't appreciate I know we don't appreciate the generations that come before and the things that they do for us. Like looking at you, Gen Z, uh, we have these conversations so that you can talk about them openly, but we had to, millennials and Gen X, I think, had to start having them and be like deal with the stigma of it first before it could become open. And
Yeah, and I
uh,
think I think with especially with Gen X, that's why there's so many people who want to work for themselves, right? And own their own businesses, and they're very entrepreneurial, because they see that as the only way to have that control or be able to put that work-life balance into their lives, which is kind of funny because when you own your own business, it tends to go the other way,
I
right?
was just gonna say, as someone with their own business, there is no division between work and life anymore.
Right.
Like all of the tricks in the world can't separate my brain from work Rochelle and personal Rochelle. But that's a huge divergence, right? From like boomers who, and I'm going to clarify baby boomers. I know boomers become kind of a slur, but that generation is colloquially known as baby boomer. Um, they're characterized by like longevity at a company. Like if they're treated well, they stay there forever. Gen X, like you said, kind of wanted to work for themselves. And I feel like millennials became the generation where we were hopping around every couple of years because that was the only way to either get a raise or to get an increase in status. And we were literally told that in like college when I was going after my advertising degree. They were like, yeah, you can't stay at an agency for more than 2 years if you want to move up. You have to hop agencies. You're probably going to have to hop states, which is also taxing. Like, how do you build a stable foundation for your life if you're
If you're moving around all the time.
moving around all the time? It's crazy.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think longevity probably in many ways, right, is tied to retirement and funding your retirement, right? So my parents if you work somewhere for a long time, you retire making 80 or 90% of what you made during your last few years for the rest of your life, right? So in many ways, why would you leave if that's what is being set up for you to now have this funding for the rest of your life and
Right.
potentially insurance and all that stuff that are, the Gen X generation and forward doesn't have that cushion, right? If unless you work for the government or something like that. But
Absolutely. Absolutely. Like the structures have changed. And I think that's something that maybe we don't always realize in the workplace because our immediate environment is the same. But that immediate environment has changed over the years, if that makes sense. Like you said, like the benefits to each of us are very, very different, and the pressures on us are different, which is something else I kind of wanted. Like maybe we move to Gen X because I would love to hear you expand on that because your challenges are different than ours. You're at a different level in your career than we are, and like the things that you're worried about are a little bit different than the things that like millennials or Gen Z are worried about.
yeah, I mean, so I think so. I'm going to talk about construction because that's what I know. But when
Perfect. That's our
I was
podcast.
in school in the early 2000s, right, there was a recession that happened pretty quickly into my career, and a lot of people left the industry. And then you had another big one in 2008, and more people left the industry. So there is a lack of people with my set of experience within companies. Like there's older and there's younger, but people in their 40s seem to be non-existent in a lot of these companies. So I think that just puts you in a hard place, right? Where you're if there's less of you, then you're doing more potentially, and that can lead to burnout.
Well, that's really interesting. That skills gap is not something I had thought about. It's something we talk about in proposals a lot. It's like you go to conferences and you see a lot of like under 5 years of experience and a lot of like over 15 years of experience. But those people in the middle seem to disappear.
And I think that was due to the later recession, but I think there's another one that was due to the recession in the early 2000s. So your 20 to 25 years of experience is also missing.
Yeah. Yeah, I very rarely come across a proposal professional that's, or at least they're not saying that they've done 25 years of experience. When we do, they're absolute unicorns. But yeah, it's weird because you have like people who are overqualified, these 15, 20-year people. You have people who are underqualified to do those kind of like mid-level management jobs that need to get done. So that burden has to go somewhere. That's so
Somebody
fascinating.
somebody with, my level of experience, right? If they're sitting here every day drawing in Revit, that is I'm paying somebody a lot of money to sit here and do production that somebody younger could do, but there's not that, those people don't exist, right? So you're either doing stuff that you've been doing for a long time, which you may or may not enjoy. Some people do, some people don't, right? You would hope 25 years in that you've, at least me and a lot of people I talk to, right, that you've moved beyond the same thing you were doing at 5 years. Um,
Right, career growth, it's
but
important.
but for a lot of people, that's not the case.
Yeah, I,
So I think that
yeah,
can turn to burnout too, right? If you're doing something that you don't enjoy or you think you're beyond, that's
absolutely.
frustrating.
Absolutely. Yeah, there was a lot of when I was in-house, kind of like the admin work to keep proposals floating, like data storage and things that like they're icky tasks that need to happen, but probably could have been offloaded to someone else, like a junior colleague. There's never a junior colleague to do that, because they just throw you in.
Yeah, and then I do think with Gen X, right, it's the first generation where you really needed to have two careers in within a family to be able to financially survive.
Oh, okay, I was like two careers.
Yeah, yeah. So, you know, two partners working together to provide for the family. And like my mom and my wife's mom both had jobs, but they were, more administrative and just kind of extra spending money instead of being a needed.
Right, you could pay the bills on one income.
Mhm.
And that's again, Gen X and the generations that have come since, that pressure is high. Because it's impossible to live on one income with a family. I mean, it's not impossible, it's very, very challenging.
Yeah, and I think it depends on where you live too. But I even like think about the first house we bought and how much it was worth versus how much it's worth now, and it's insane how much that has gone up. And just a starter level entry home, um, and the amount that costs in Denver is really high. So
Same in Albuquerque.
yeah,
Same. My first home, when I look at it now, I'm like, oh my gosh, why couldn't I have held on to that and sold it now?
yeah,
Uh, just wild, wild, wild. And I recognize that like I'm an outlier in the millennial. I purchased a home, yay. And I'm very privileged to have done that. So that's not common for millennials. It's not common for Gen Z. I'm hoping we will be able to turn the tide before Gen Alpha hits the workforce. But it's not looking promising.
no. So I mean, you talk about with Gen X, right, having to save for retirement on their own while costs are going up. Um, it it does create a lot of stress trying to cope with everything and how much kids cost. And we're a lot of us are at the age where kids are going into college, and um, so just a lot of stress around finances.
I'd imagine. I also imagine something I ran across a lot was caretaking
Oh
is
yeah,
increasing for Gen X, like
yeah.
caretaking of your parents, which is a huge mental load as well. That's a different type of burnout, but it's still emotional burnout for sure.
Yeah, and a lot of people, right, their parents potentially are moving in with them, which does in some ways help the financial burden, I guess, if their parents are contributing. But and then you look at, right, if our kids go to college, right, are they going to be able to go out and live on their own? Or now are we kind of working our way back towards multiple generations living together, in one house, right? Because you
Yeah,
have kids who neither can afford to be out on their own, and we're the ones bearing the burden of that, right?
right. Which again comes back to a different type of mental load, emotional load, having all of those personalities and generations and people in one space that you're not used to. Even if you love your family, even if you're close, like that's tough.
Hmm.
That's really tough.
So what about the boomers, the baby boomers then?
The boomers.
I mean, I think when you talk about a lot of these, you're talking about the influence their parents had on them, right? And so I think with baby boomers, it was a lot of you're lucky to have a job, um, stay where you are, you want stability. Um, and I think for a lot of them, stability was provided.
That's the thing. Yeah, they definitely had those uh they were both definitely being told those narratives, like hold on to that stability, but they were also brought into a world where everything was fairly stable. They kind of benefited from an economic prosperity, which just because of your age, like you don't recognize how wonderful that is, right? Like we don't see how privileged we are when we're sitting in our privilege. Not disparaging boomers in any way, shape, or form, but they were able to chase what we look at today as like traditional success
Yeah, the American dream.
and the American dream and attain it because the structures were in place, the social and economic structures were in place for them to do that. They were able to work. They were able to do what millennials wanted to do, work hard, achieve your goal, which is what they were trying to teach us to do because those are our parents for the most part. But they're still burning out too, right? Like millennials are probably frustrating the heck out of them, but
Um,
they're
I think so. I mean, but I don't think they would do anything. It's just one of those like, well, this is just how it is. We accept it, right? We're lucky to have this job. We tolerate this because this is just a side effect of having it. And I think there's a lot of definition. Um, your who you are is defined by what you did, um,
right,
what your job was. Uh,
right. I read I read something really interesting about the boomer generation coming into retirement and maybe looking back on how hard they worked and questioning whether it was worth it. And that kind of harkens back to an episode, this several episodes back where you mentioned the author who had kind of done that study on wealthy and famous people and like what they regretted.
yeah,
And I think this generation is kind of coming to terms with maybe they didn't make the life choices that they wanted to make when they were younger. Like they chose work and chose like climbing that corporate ladder and chasing that traditional success at maybe the cost of personal relationships or personal fulfillment. And so, like, struggling with that psychological burden is burning them out a little bit.
I also think so. The ones I've interacted with who are nearing retirement are at that age, right? There's a lot of unknown about what
Oh,
retirement
yeah.
is, right? And how's it going to look, and how am I going to be able to afford it? And like I look at my parents, and I think they're busier now. I don't even know how they ever had a job because they're so busy in retirement. But you, I think they get really fixed on like they were told this is what retirement's going to look like. And so if they can't have that or they're uncertain about what that means to them, then I think there's a lot of stress created around, should I retire? Am I going to enjoy it? It's kind of seen as this final thing that you do.
Right.
And once I make that decision, right, it's over. I've pulled the plug and I'm done. And that's just not the case, right? If you were to retire and not like it, you could come back and work, or you could find something that you do enjoy to do, right? A passion project or something like that. Um,
Right.
so I think that's what I see with a lot of them that I interact with is just the fear around what is retirement going to be.
I would agree. I feel like they probably got a little bit of pressure again from their parents, which laid out the steps for life. Like, get your entry level job, stick with it, stay with the company, work hard, retire. And so like they've gone through their life kind of checking the boxes. Like I did this thing, I got my reward. I did this thing, I got my reward. Retirement feels like that next check the box, get your reward.
And then you get to live.
Yeah, and then you get to, but what does that mean
Right.
for a generation that like
Work.
maybe built their identity on their work and their accolades and achievements in that work? What does that look like? Who are you now? It's like an identity crisis almost to me, which
Absolutely.
seems scary. I also something I've noticed in the boomers that I've interacted with and something I read about extensively was this severe stigmatization of mental health. Like this generation does not want to talk about their issues openly. They prefer to keep things private. Like they might talk about it one on one, but it's very much like you're not depressed, you're just feeling down, smile and figure it out
Yeah.
type thing.
Rub some dirt,
I'm sorry.
rub some dirt on it.
Yeah, rub some dirt on it. You're you're fine. And again, then that probably came from pressures on them to be stoic and keep checking those boxes and not slow down. But it
Which you,
makes it really
which you
hard to talk
think
about
about.
burnout with them.
If you think about who their parents were, right? Going through
Right,
wars, the Great Depression,
right.
all those things, right? Well, this thing over here, your little depression thing is really not that bad. It could be much worse,
Right,
right?
like we were starving.
Yeah.
I'm sorry,
Starving,
your
we're killing
your
each other.
feelings are hurt. Exactly.
All my friends
Exactly.
died.
Yeah, no, I totally understand why their parents were not very forgiving on touchy-feely things, and why it took so long for us to be talking about those. But
And they experienced a little bit of that with Vietnam and stuff too.
yeah, oh, absolutely,
So
absolutely.
all the more reason, right, to just buckle down and get through it.
Right? Or, counterpoint to talk about things. But that's generational bias over here.
Yep.
When we
Yep.
talk about things, they get better. So, yeah, I just, are there any generations we haven't talked about that we should? I feel like we've
Z,
kind of danced
did we
around
talk
Z and
about Z?
Alpha.
Yeah.
Z, I feel like in burnout conversations, Z gets lumped in with millennials. And I'm sure they hate that, but we accept them, we embrace them. I think so. Gen Z is just kind of entering the workforce, right?
Yeah.
Uh,
Yeah.
like they've only been in it for a couple of years, the older ones.
I mean, they're 20, 25 maybe. Uh, 20 to 30.
I think millennials cut off around like 96.
Okay. I'm trying to
So
95 to 2025. That's 30.
that's 30. Oh my gosh. Oh
So
my
they're
gosh.
more in the workplace than you think.
No, well, that made me feel old. Thanks, Jeff. Ouch. I always think of them though. I mean, those are the old ones. I just think of Gen Z as these sweet little baby angels that are entering the workforce, and we're like, what have you people done? But I feel like they're characterized very much as the most open of the generations, and they have really high expectations for work-life balance and support and level of communication because they were born into a, a digital world where everything is online and you can communicate instantly whenever you need it to. And they expect that within all facets of their life. So, and they're kind of riding the coattails of millennials and Gen X starting to have burnout conversations. So they're just second nature to them. And yet
Yeah.
they're also burning out.
Well, I think the issue for them, right, is maybe they have a bit shorter attention span, or they're more demanding of this needs to happen now, right? The kind of instant gratification that they've had their whole life.
Is that generational bias? Or, I mean, I would believe it, but I'm wondering if that's maybe.
No, I think that's. I mean, I think all our attention spans has gone down, right?
That's true.
So uh, how does that, when you're talking about work, right? And especially now they're being led by Gen X and millennials, right, who are expecting them to put in the work and then they'll get rewarded, right? How does that factor into burnout if they want it now?
Right. Oh, absolutely. I love seeing like silly stories. I don't know how to characterize that, but like I don't know why my Instagram algorithm thinks I like work funny memes and skits and such. But I always get these like cute stories about millennials interacting with their Gen Zers and like how they think so differently than we do. Like one of my favorites is a millennial manager asking a Gen Z employee to get 10 pieces of paper. And when the Gen Zer hands them the paper, it's warm. And the millennial is very confused. And the Gen Zer is like, well, I just asked the printer to print 10 blank pages instead of like going and manually counting 10 pages. And I'm like, that's so fascinating to me, like how we approach different things. And like it probably took the same amount of time, but it was probably more efficient in the Gen Zer's mind to do it that way. And just so fascinating that we think we get to same solution with a different path, right? I
Yeah.
don't remember what my point of that at the very beginning was, but
I don't know what your point was either.
I got distracted by this cute story that I really wanted to tell. Because it's one of my favorite like interaction moments. It's been on the internet for a long time. I think it went back to like the short attention span and the digital connectivity. Like I don't think Gen Z would think in an analog way to just manually go count paper the way that millennials or Gen X would. That's a very analog thing to do. Why would we do it when we can ask the computer to do it? So I think that was my point, was to harken back to.
Well, I think the other thing, and again, I'm going to talk about construction because that's what I know, and I'm sure it shows up in a lot of different ways in other industries as well, right? But there's a lot of we do this because this is the way it's done and has been
Oh
done
yeah.
for a long time. And I could see how that would be very, very frustrating to the Gen Z people because they probably know better ways to do it. And
Oh,
if they're told to
absolutely.
do something in an inefficient way, um, I'm sure that really eats at them too. So
Oh, for sure.
yeah,
Uh, that if it had gone wrong could have been an example of that, like the Gen Zer being like, well, I'm going to count paper in this method instead of doing it your way.
yeah.
Probably very
So
stressful.
that's where I think they probably suffer from burnout the most. Be interesting. Maybe if they listen to this, they can give us some feedback and share with others. That'd be
Yes,
great for
in
all
any of
generations.
you, all generations, please, boomers, Gen Z, millennials, Gen X, chime in. I would love to like have this conversation on like LinkedIn or something.
Because
Or
even as I'm listening to you and me talk, right, I see our own biases showing up in this too. So I'm sure other generations would probably disagree with us potentially.
absolutely, my mom listens to every single one of our episodes, and I know she's sitting there going, mm-mm, that's not how it is. Or she has thoughts. Uh, yeah. Should we move to talking about how to navigate all of
Yeah,
these
we should.
generational approaches in a work environment? Like, how do we deal with boomer level? I don't want to talk about mental health down to Gen Z. I'm going to post about my mental health on Instagram every day or TikTok or whatever. How do we navigate that?
Snapchat.
What?
Snap.
Snapchat.
Well, I mean, I think it's very similar, right? To we all have different personalities, right? So we all come from different generations. We all have different personalities. If I'm interacting with somebody in the same way, no matter what personality type they are, people are going to get frustrated with me. Um, if I'm interacting with people in different generations the same way, people are going to get frustrated with me. So I think we really have to just be aware that there are major differences between us in a good way.
Yeah.
Many people would argue it's in a bad way, but I disagree with that. One of my favorite, have you heard? I'm sure you know the golden rule. Have you heard of the platinum rule?
I don't think I have.
So the golden rule, right? Do unto others as
As
you
you would
would
have them
to
do it
you.
yourself, yeah.
The platinum rule is do unto others as they would have you do unto them, right? So considering their personality type, this is how they want to be communicated with, not, and so you alter your style to match who you're interacting with. So if
Okay.
I say if I'm a thinker, I'm a thinker. Um,
I was gonna say,
if
yes.
if you come to me, right, and you just start rattling off a bunch of stuff, I'm probably going to give you an answer, but I'm going to continue to think about it long after we've talked, and I'm probably going to change my mind. So having you come to me and say, "Hey, I would like to talk about this in an hour. Can you give it some thought before we talk?" That's a much better approach, right? Where if you do that with somebody who's very direct, they're going to be like, "No, just spit it at me. I want it now."
Right.
And quit with the stories. I don't need any of these stories. Let's just make a decision. So I think we have to, and there's a lot of conversation about that in our industry and many other industries, different personality types, but I don't think we do the same thing with the generations.
Right. I agree. And I think that causes a lot of strife. Uh like I feel as if the older generations kind of look at the younger generations and think that their openness is like inappropriate and untoward. But then the younger generations look up to the older generations and then perceive them as stubborn and stale because they won't move forward and they're anti-progress. Um, so I feel like what kind of strategies are we putting in place? Are they similar to working with like different personalities to flexibility and
Yeah, I think you have to give people an option, right? Of we're going to offer this in a bunch of different ways, right? So if I think of I'm going to put on an hour-long workshop, Gen Z is going to look at that and be like, ugh, an hour? Like, what are you doing? I need it in like 30-second, give it to me quicker. Um, so if we're going to do a workshop, right, how can we offer it in an hour version? How can we offer it in bite-sized pieces? Um, and I think another huge part is trying to show people how it benefits them, right?
right.
So a baby boomer, how is this conversation going to benefit you? And it could be that it helps you understand other people better, or it could be that it benefits their own life some way, right? But you've got to show people the benefit in having these conversations around burnout and mental health.
Absolutely. And I feel like we're doing a good job of that. We're starting these
Better,
conversations.
better, yeah, much better. Still
But
on.
yeah, better, maybe not good, but the World Health Organization now recognizes burnout. So I think that's
Yep.
a huge step. Right. That happened a couple years ago, but still. Anything else on like
Well, I think
navigating?
I think it's company specific too, right? Because I think there are some companies that do a great job of it. I think there are other companies that do a horrible job of it. So
Yes.
to me, it's you know, I think as generations change and take over leadership of companies, things are going to change too. Um,
Which is starting to happen now, right? Like silent generation boomers are retiring. Gen X is stepping into those kind of senior roles.
yeah.
So maybe that's why this is like all coming to a head right now too. Like we're just in that like perfect storm of frustrations
Well,
and burnout and stress.
I think getting more women in leadership positions, especially in the construction industry, is going to have a positive impact on this, right? Because you all
Can you
have
say that louder?
more empathetic, you care more about people. And so, you're going to have those more nurturing conversations than a lot of men will.
Which is a whole stigma on its own, right? Like
Mhm.
men can be empathetic and have
Yeah,
these conversations,
yeah, I
but
would agree.
whole separate conversation. I just wanted to point that out before we reinforce like a gender role stereotype. But yeah, this is a really complicated topic. There's so much, like this could be an entire series where we just go through each of the generations and talk about their struggles and how to work with them individually, honestly.
Well, and I also think, when was the last time you sat in a training talking about, okay, here's what's unique about Gen Z, here's what's unique about the millennials, here's what's unique about Gen X. And nobody's talking about this stuff, right? So as a manager or leader, how do I learn what's important to them, the younger generations or the older generations, if we're not having these conversations about generations? It's really easy to just be like, ugh, millennials are such a pain in the ass. But it's that's not productive, right? Because we all have to work together.
Right. I mean, you can complain about us. It's fine. Everyone else does. We're used to it. We shoulder the burden.
But everybody
I
was
find
saying
it
it about us too.
interesting.
It was just before.
Yeah, I mean, millennials and boomers have like an ongoing internet feud forever and ever.
Right.
But I find it interesting you say that because every webinar I've seen on like how to engage with Gen Z in the workplace or like how to recruit them is led by not a Gen Zer. And I'm like, what research have you done, Mr. Gen X or Miss Boomer or even the millennial? Like what it's all very speculative. Like we are observing this generation in their natural habitat and have concluded that they have a 30-second attention span because of TikTok. So you have to communicate with them that way. But I would be really interested to actually hear from that generation
Yeah.
on What do you want from us? And
Yeah,
for us
that'd
to
be a great thing
listen,
to do.
because yeah, yeah, exactly. Any final thoughts before we move to our burning question?
No, I think it's a really important topic. I'm glad you suggested it, and I think it's something that we need to talk a lot more about.
I do want to do more on it, maybe a mini series
And
on profiling each generation. Maybe we'll help our listeners figure out. Maybe
there,
we can get someone from each generation on to talk about their generation, have like a little panel. That'd be great.
that would be good. And I think the other thing that's important to take away from this is that burnout affects all of us. It does not discriminate,
Nope,
um, just based on which generation we're in. We're all affected by it.
we're all tired. Absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah, I
All
mean,
right.
isn't the statistic in construction, it's 8 out of 10 people are burned out.
Yeah.
Well, 8 out of 10 people are not all millennials in the construction industry. So
That is, thank you for using statistics to drive that point home. And that's also an old statistic that's been around for years. That's pre-pandemic. And since we're reporting like higher than pre-pandemic levels of burnout, that number is probably like 9 out of 10, 8.5 out of 10 now, which is,
yeah,
we all have to fix this. We have to talk. I'm calling a multi-generational meeting of the minds in the industry. We're going to figure this out together.
sounds like a good goal.
Perfect. Jeff and I are on it. All right, let's move on to our burning question.
And now it's time for burning questions.
So this listener says, I've been having a tough time with my manager who is really resistant to adopting new tools and technologies that I believe could help our team be more efficient and maybe reduce stress. They're so stuck in their ways and it's frustrating. How can I approach this situation and find common ground to make our work environment better for everyone?
Oh,
This is
this is
really
how it's always
common.
done, huh?
This is how it's all. You said that, and I was like, oh man, put a pin in that because we get some variation of this question a lot.
Yeah.
This happens in proposals all the time. Like I see there are all kinds of new technologies out for like data storage and um, customer relations and even things like InDesign. And we still have firms that are using like Word and PowerPoint and Excel to manage all of their proposals and data. Ah, that hurts my heart that you
I
just raised
raised
your
my
hand on that, Jeff. And why? Why? Because it's familiar, because everyone has access to it. This is
Sue's
how we've
leading.
always done it.
Sue's leading it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
they're familiar with it.
Yep.
And that younger generation is coming up and being like, no, no. But how do we convince them that there is a maybe better way to do it? Like, how do we get them to
I guess
try the better way?
yeah, I mean, I would start with trying to understand their viewpoint and perspective on why they think that's the best way to do it. Um, because if you can learn that, right now you can start to address their concerns, right? If we don't know why they feel that doing it this way is important, um, then it's really hard to address their concerns. So I would start with trying to understand and just be curious about, okay, you want to do it this way? Help me understand why that's your preference and what's going on here. But because I may be missing something too, right? It's completely possible I may not fully understand the process.
When I was going to tack onto that, the person who is resistant to change might not understand that there's a problem. They might not see it.
Right.
I frequently explain like the issues. Something I see often in proposals is we want to use Word because everybody can get into the document, so anybody can make changes. That's a huge, huge no-no and problem in proposals. Like you don't want anybody to go into your document and make changes. It makes it really hard to do quality control. And what I often find in talking to people who are resistant to moving to another type of proposal delivery, like an InDesign or Canva or something like that, is that they don't see the quality control problem. they don't see the issue with that. And so we kind of have to talk through and raise the flag there and then work through why that's a problem for them and for the company. So it might be an awareness thing on both sides.
Yeah, because if you look at, what we're doing on the design side, there is multiple of us in the same Revit model making changes all the time, right? And so, yeah, we may just not understand that that's an issue for what you're doing.
Right.
And at the end, right, it goes to somebody and they do quality control, but I could, if people make changes and don't tell you, and now I go in and my drawings are messed up, that's obnoxious.
So that was going to be my question in that is one, when everybody's going to the model, are you aware of them going into the model and at least moderately aware of the changes they're going to be making?
No. So
Okay.
you look at the way BIM is, it's mostly now hosted in a web-based environment, right? So your model lives, it's live, it lives in a cloud somewhere, and the architect can just be in doing whatever they want. We're in doing whatever we want. They move a wall, all our stuff is now gone. You don't know that unless you're going back in and either they told you they moved the wall or you're finding it out on your own by double checking everything over and over again, which really is not very efficient.
So in an ideal world, they should tell you that
Right.
they've moved a wall.
Which is what, if you were doing proposals, right, and somebody told you they made a change, then it wouldn't be that big of a deal, right? But it's that we don't communicate.
Right. Right. Yeah. If somebody's just going in and making edits and like changing strategy, and sometimes it's really hard to see where those changes have been made and who has made them. And if they're working on incorrect data, which I've seen happen before, then we submit an invalid proposal, like because no one knew that happened. Fascinating. Sorry, I'm trying to wrap my head around this like comparison to the BIM model and my document because I thought that was a foolproof argument is that you can't have multiple people in one project not talking to each other. But y'all do it every day, so no wonder that you don't understand why it's a problem for us.
Yeah, we do.
Where I just learned something live and now I understand why so many people have so much trouble with this conversation. Thanks, Jeff. Side note. You answered my burning question.
Back to our burning question. I think so. Trying to understand where they're coming from, and then I think again, right, trying to understand the person and who they are, right. So if I'm interacting with an engineer and trying to convince them that this is a good change, I may do that from a very data-based perspective, right? If I'm doing it with an architect, maybe it's how does this help you be more creative or something like that, right? So you kind of got to think about the person you're interacting with too and tailor it to what they're going to think is important.
And
Because
going
you
back
and
to
I probably have very different definitions of what's important when it comes to proposals, right?
Based on previous conversations, yes. I wanted to tie that back into your comment about personalities earlier and understanding like asking permission versus just spitting it out. So understanding that as well, like what kind of personality or what kind of generation, to tie it back into the theme of the episode as well, you're dealing with will probably help you with having this conversation as well. Like whether it's a, hey, I've noticed this process could be more efficient. Can we talk about it in the future? Versus, hey, can I show you this issue that's happening right now? Let's solve it right now type thing.
Yeah, I think that's huge, right. Making sure they're in a place to be open to the conversation instead of distracted by something else will probably help a lot.
Absolutely. And
also,
I think
you can think too about when they have their most, when they're the most creative, when they're the most energetic. If I've been through a long day and answered 100 emails and somebody comes to me with a problem, I'm probably not going to be very receptive to discuss the problem. But if you could catch me in the morning when I am more creative, then yeah, I'll probably give it a lot more thought.
Definitely do not catch me in the afternoon with a problem. I will shut down.
But there are people too who are
the
opposite of us, right? That like stuff in the afternoon or in the evening or whatever. So
2 o'clock in the morning. I have one of those clients and I don't understand how they function. It's wild to me.
So again,
Uh,
I think it all just comes back to again, it's understanding the person and tailoring your approach to the person. Kind of the same thing we've been talking about all day.
yeah, maybe again, future conversation is maybe not lumping people into these like big groups, you know, boomer and Gen X and SME and marketer, like just let humans be humans and understand them on that level. And you're probably going to. It's really hard for corporations because it's kind of expensive, but it's the best investment for your people. And if they're your most important resource or your most valuable asset, you better. This is just a general call to every single AEC company that says that. You're telling me that your people are your most important resource or asset or whatever it is. You better be investing in them on an individual level like that.
Yeah.
Rochelle's off her soapbox.
But even when I was having a conversation about motivating people this week, and it's like each person has a different motivator, right? So for some people, money may be very motivating. For other people, it's acknowledgement. For other people, it's time off with their family. So you even just motivating employees to work harder, you've got to figure out what it is that motivates each person, not each generation and not each personality type and so on and so forth. It is an individual thing. And if I would say that most people too, right? If they're stuck in fear, right? Success is the primary motivator for a lot of us, right? But what does success mean to that person? Not success within your company or success within America or whatever you call it.
Right. On success. We have a whole episode on that, like defining what success is for you and how you work towards that and how you use that to not burn out.
We have that in our developmental check-ins. We have each person define success, and then it's in their check-in, their definition of success, so that you can try to steer them towards that definition.
I love that. That feels like the better way to do employee reviews. What is your definition of success versus here's our ambiguous definition of success, and we're going to grade you on it. But I feel like we've digressed a little bit and have had some soapbox.
Question.
I hope we answered the question. If we did not, let us know. We'll try again. Any final thoughts on generational burnout?
No, I did think of one other thing to help answer their question, though. If you've tried in the past and you do feel like they're stuck in their ways, somehow you have to let go of that, or else you're never going to get them to adopt any tools. So let go of the expectation that they're always going to say no and keep trying.
I love it. Expectations. All right, friendly reminder to our listeners, if you have a burning question, you can email it to us at burnoutbanter@gmail.com. Please remember to like or subscribe to the podcast on Amazon, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube, or wherever you listen to make sure you never miss an episode. And finally, if your organization is struggling with burnout and stress management, Jeff and I offer in-house coaching to help your staff get back on track. So you can reach out to us again at burnoutbanter@gmail.com or via LinkedIn for personalized support tailored to your organization's needs.
That was a big topic, so we apologize for the length of the episode, but Rochelle and I were feeling chatty today, so.
I'm so passionate. I started researching this and I just got so excited about it. Like, I want to do a mini series on this so much.
Yeah.
Look for that in the future, y'all.
All right. We'll see everybody next month.
Stay out.
Bye.
Stay well.